What's up, everyone? It's Andrew Bone here with BamaInsider.com. We are not having a recruiting show this evening on our Bama Insider YouTube channel. Today's kind of a special day for me. It's the release date of my first book, The Road to Bama. Incredible twists and improbable turns along the Crimson Tide recruiting trail. Very excited about the release of the book. It's a project that I've been working on for a little over a year, and I was very fortunate that Triumph Books asked me to write this particular book. It kind of stemmed from Tom Van Haren's book, The Road to Ann Arbor, which he wrote back in 2018. So I was very fortunate to do the Alabama version, and really was never sure how to go about writing a book. I've always kind of dreamed about writing a book, and I've been covering recruiting since 2003. This is my 18th year, and I felt like I had a lot of knowledge on the Alabama recruiting landscape, but wasn't really sure how to even start writing a book. But fortunately, something was kind of laid out in front of me, and I just had to write it and do the interviews and kind of do the work. And fortunately, I had a great publishing company, great editor, and great mentors throughout this entire process. And once we kind of got going, we knew that we wanted to start from the Bear Bryant era, all the way into the Nick Saban era. And as everyone knows, there's just so many Alabama greats, so many college football All-Americans, college football Hall of Famers, All-Americans, NFL Hall of Famers, and most of the guys, I didn't have much of a relationship with. Like I said, I've covered recruiting throughout all the Shula years, all the Saban years, so not really knowing a lot of the Bear Bryant era players on a personal level. I thought it might be pretty difficult. Wasn't really sure who to contact or where to start. But when I first kind of started this book, I wrote down really the best names in Alabama football history, and could I potentially get in touch with some of these guys, and started writing down some of the guys during the Saban era, in terms of who had the best story. We knew that T.J. Yeldon was going to be such a important figure for this book, and I was very fortunate to get T.J. because just of his flip from Auburn to Alabama, right before the recruiting dead period started, and really wanted to pull back the curtains a little bit on that and get the full scope of it. And he went really in depth on everything, and that was such a tremendous chapter in the book. Rashaan Evans, that was another very fascinating feature, about his life growing up in Auburn, and all the connections to the Tigers with his father playing there, and growing up in Auburn, going to Auburn High School, and all the pressure. Why did he ultimately choose Alabama, and what all kind of went on behind the scenes there? So that was a really fun chapter to write as well. Going back into the the Bear Bryant era with guys like Leroy Jordan and John Hanna and Dwight Stevenson and Johnny Musso and Marty Lyons. I was very, very happy to speak with all of those guys, about their recruitment, about their life. And then going into Cornelius Bennett and Bobby Humphrey, and D'Amico Ryans, Antonio Langham, Chris Samuels, Brody Croyle, David Palmer, Jay Barker. David Palmer, I mean, what a fascinating football player he was at the University of Alabama. The deuce is loose. I made sure that he was chapter number 2. We did the entire book's in chronological order, but David Palmer, you had to put him, chapter 2 without a doubt. So that was, a very fun read. That was, definitely a fun interview. I didn't just interview the players, for this book. I interviewed, parents. I interviewed mentors, high school coaches. They're recruiting coaches. They're recruiting coaches at Alabama, who recruited them throughout that entire, year or two during their high school years. But also talking to coaches from other schools, who were big parts of their life, and who recruited them to their universities and missed on them. Got their perspective on why they ended up missing on a kid. And one of the best stories that I really enjoyed in my book was on Brody Croyle, and speaking to former Georgia head coach Mark Richt, and getting his side of things in terms of what kind of went down with Brody. Was he really committed to Florida State, privately committed to Florida State, and was that where he was going? that was a really fun interview with Coach Rick and Brody, and also with John Croyle. I had a lot of fun doing those interviews. So the book is out now. You can purchase via Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Books a Million, Triumph Books. Go to those websites, order a copy. Please write a review. If you can write a review, that would mean the absolute world to me. And I hope Alabama fans, and really any fans, if you're a fan of football recruiting, if you're a fan of these football players, I think you're really going to enjoy getting to know them a little bit more. Getting to know about their life, their journey, reading about Tua's, early days in Hawaii. I just think it's it was a really awesome book to write. Like I said, I had no idea how I was even going to go about this, and luckily, Tom Van Haren had written the book, The Road to Ann Arbor. I got a copy of it. I was able to read it, and that gave me a lot of a lot of good pointers on kind of how to conduct the book and how to piece it together. But also just going back in time. I wasn't sure how far back I wanted to go, but there was just so many Alabama greats who I believe, even though some of us, we know about Alabama football history, we know about, all these great players and all Americans. I feel like there's this new generation of fans that have been so attracted to Alabama during the Saban years. They may not know about these guys. They may know their names, but they don't know about their recruiting journeys or their life. And I was very fortunate to put all that together and release this book. So I hope many Alabama fans out there will purchase a copy, and I hope you really enjoy it. It was a lot of fun for me to write, and I think it's going to be a lot of fun for you all to read. So that's all I want to say really about the book. I do want to give a little bit of an update on the recruiting front, kind of the state of the recruiting class right now. Since we're not having a show this evening, you can ask me, a lot of questions. Of course, we answer a lot of those questions just about every single week, and not a lot has changed in that regard. But what's going on in the recruiting class right now? Well, Alabama, currently sits with 21 commitments in its 2021 class. I think there's probably 5 spots remaining, maybe less. I don't see them signing 27, so I wouldn't say there's 6 spots left, but let's just say there's probably 5 spots remaining in the class. Alabama's set at quarterback. They have Jalen Milroe, one of the top high school quarterbacks in the country out of Texas. Very solid commitment, not going anywhere. So don't worry about him flipping, but very solid commitment there for the Crimson Tide. Running back wise, we've talked about Camar Wheaton a lot, throughout the year. I do think he ends up going to Oklahoma. Now, LSU, very much in it. He has Alabama in his top 3. I just don't see Alabama signing a running back. I think Alabama's very, happy with the guys that it has. Now, they wouldn't say no to Camar Wheaton. There's no doubt about that. If Camar Wheaton calls Alabama and says, "Hey, I want to commit to you guys," there's going to be a spot. But I just don't see it happening. Hasn't visited Alabama in more than a year, so I think he's going to end up going to Oklahoma. Wide receiver wise, as we know, Alabama's recruited really well at those positions, at that position this year with Ja'Cory Brooks, Ajay Hall, and Christian Leary. So, pretty good group right there. Still trying to get one more guy. Now, if they do, if they don't get one of these players, I think they'll probably be happy with just 3. But Brian Thomas remains a top priority recruit for them out of Louisiana. Destin Payson, another guy that they've been recruiting for a while. I could see Alabama potentially taking Payson if Brian Thomas ends up staying in state and going to LSU. So those are the 2 guys that we're continuing to watch. I know Alabama still loves Xavier Worthy, who's committed to Michigan, but as far as we know, and as far as he says, he's still very firmly committed to the Wolverines. And now, I think with the recruiting dead period getting extended until January the 1st, it's going to be extremely difficult for him to make a trip to Tuscaloosa, especially with him graduating early. So I just don't see him, flipping to Alabama at this time. Tight end wise, Alabama does have one tight end, Robbie Oots. Now, keep in mind, they are going to be bringing in Caden Clark, who gray-shirted, so that's going to be 2 tight ends essentially in this class. They're not really recruiting anybody else. They're pretty set at that position. offensive line. It can go, as everyone knows, it's one of the best offensive line classes we've seen in the last few years. Really good at the tackle position. Two tackles who are probably two of the top 10 players in the country, and Tommy Brockermeyer and J.C. Latham. Both five-star offensive tackles. Alabama is sitting in very good shape there. T.J. Ferguson, another Rivals 100 offensive lineman. Your Swiss Army knife type offensive lineman. He can play just about any position, and he's open to playing any position. He loves the fact that he can move around. And I think Alabama, it has very high feelings about him. They feel like he's one of the best offensive linemen in the country. You also have James Brockermeyer, who is one of the top centers in the country. Tommy's twin brother, and he is a very solid commitment to the Crimson Tide as well. So that's kind of a look at the offensive side of the ball. Now, defense, pretty stout defense so far. I mean, I really like the defensive front and what they've been able to put together so far. Led by Damon Payne, the big defensive tackle out of Michigan. Tim Keenan. Anquan Barnes, also Monkel Goodwine. I think Alabama's done a really good job on the defensive front so far. Still trying to get some more players. I mean, there's a lot of guys who are still out there. Defensive tackle wise, I think Alabama's going to be pretty set at that position unless they can get Mason Smith, the five-star defensive tackle out of Louisiana. Still has Alabama in his top 4, top 5. Still plans on waiting until All-American game to announce his college decision. So Alabama still has a chance there. Maybe can get him back on campus. I do think that LSU, probably Georgia, a little bit ahead right now, but I think probably more so just because he's been able to visit those schools a little bit more often. He visited Georgia about a month or so ago, visited LSU a few times. So if Alabama can get him back on campus at some point, even though he's not allowed to, he can still come back and tour the campus and see everything. Just can't meet with the coaches. They can get him back, get some high feelings from him after that visit. They're going to have a chance because he actually did grow up an Alabama fan. But as of right now, I think Alabama's probably on the outside. Defensive end, that's a position where Alabama's still trying to get a couple players, at least one. I think getting at least one of these guys is an absolute must. They would probably take 2 if they could get 2, but I think at least taking 1 is a big priority. You have Shamar Turner, Tumise Adelie, 2 very elite defensive ends from the state of Texas who have had very high interest in Alabama for a long time. Neither one doesn't look like they're going to make a decision anytime soon. But with Tumise, it's probably an Alabama, Florida, Texas A&M recruiting battle. Former Ohio State commitment, but I don't see him going back to Ohio State. Shamar Turner, as of right now, really looks like it's an Alabama, Texas A&M battle. LSU, Georgia, they're in it as well, but hasn't visited those schools. So as of right now, Texas A&M and Alabama for him, and depending on who you talk to, I think everybody's heard different things on him. Alabama certainly feels like they're in a great position with him, but still have to chip away. And he likes the in-state schools a lot. I'm sure he'll be watching this Alabama Texas A&M game along with Tumise Adelie. Both of those guys will be watching this game this weekend very closely. Alabama's still pushing for JT Tuamola, a 5-star defensive end from Seattle. Corey Foreman's still out there, but I would say he's more of a long shot than anything at this time. Tyreek Sapp, Florida commitment, who has high interest in Alabama, wants to visit, but will he be able to with this recruiting dead period? I just don't think he will, and I don't see him flipping at this time. So those are kind of the main guys that Alabama still heavily involved in, heavily recruiting, heavily pushing for, and really trying to get as part of this recruiting class on the defensive front. Now, linebacker-wise, great linebacker class. I love this class. It's probably one of the most unheralded positions. We talk about the offensive line a lot. We talk about the wide receiver group, but the linebacker group is outstanding. I really like Dallas Turner a lot. One of the top pass rushers, edge rushers in the entire country out of St. Thomas Aquinas. Deontay Lawson, having a unbelievable year down at Mobile Christian. 5-star caliber player in my opinion, even though I think he's right in the 200 range. I think he could have a big rise in the rankings after this season. Ian Jackson, from Prattville, also having a very, very good season, and also Kendrick Blackshire out of Duncanville, Texas. So those are four outstanding linebackers in this year's class. Now, linebacker wise, they're pretty much finished except for one player, Xavian Worthy. Big time talent out of IMG Academy, originally from Graceville High School in Florida, transferred to IMG. This spring, and I don't think he's played yet this season. Has had a foot injury, but remains a very very key Alabama target. This is another recruiting battle that looks like it's probably going to come down to Alabama, Florida, and Georgia. Some people think Alabama's in the lead. Some people think Georgia's in the lead. Some people think Florida's, got a good chance to land him. So, probably going to be one of those signing day decisions for him. But I do think Alabama's going to wait it out. They love this kid. They have for a long time, and he's got a great relationship with the coaching staff. Defensive back wise, definitely some great defensive backs in this class. I really like Devontae Smith, Smitty 2.0. Definitely a very talented kid out of Ohio who essentially flipped from Ohio State to Alabama. I love Kadarius Callaway. I think he's extremely talented. Can play safety, can play corner. He can play just about anything, and I think he certainly has the talent to make a big impact at the college level. He's a guy that had under 1,000 yards receiving as a junior, and also had 11 interceptions. He's a 6 foot, about 210-pound athlete. A lot of people kind of write him off as a safety, but he can play corner. He's a 4.50 40 guy, so I would not be surprised if we saw him potentially playing corner at the next level. Kyrie Jackson, another outstanding defensive back, junior college player that I think is extremely talented, and definitely somebody that it can come in and make an immediate impact. Junior college player. Nick Saban, doesn't really like to recruit junior college players unless he believes they can come in and make a big impact. And I certainly believe that Kyrie Jackson is one of those guys that they feel like is an impact type player. So keep an eye on him. Another defensive back in Alabama's recruiting class, Kane Williams. 6'2", 210-pound athlete. Could potentially grow into a linebacker at the college level. Out of Louisiana. I think he's an outstanding football player. Go watch his film. Very physical. He's got great speed. Can play safety. Can potentially play linebacker. Would not be surprised if he grows into a linebacker once he gets to Alabama. But Alabama currently considered Alabama's in Alabama's class as a defensive back. So big gift out of Kane, from Kane Williams in the state of Louisiana. But defensive back wise, still some talented players that are out there that they're heavily pursuing, that they heavily want. Guys like Terrion Arnold out of Tallahassee. Another guy, kind of like Xavian Sorey. Both of those guys have been talking. They want to play together. We'll see if that actually happens, but I definitely think that Alabama, Florida, Georgia, all top 3 schools for him right now. It's going to be a very tight recruiting battle, probably until the end. JaQuincy McKinstry, it's certainly a big time target in-state wise for Alabama. I still think Auburn's in the driver's seat, but the longer he waits, the better of a chance Alabama is going to potentially have in landing him. Alabama's still recruiting Sage Ryan out of Louisiana. Grew up an LSU fan, but Alabama's still very much involved there and very much in the picture. Been compared to Xavier McKinney throughout the process, and he really likes that role a lot. Jordan Gilbert, another Louisiana kid that Alabama's heavily recruited, heavily been involved in, for a long time. So certainly somebody that they really like a lot, and somebody that they want to sign this year. So we'll kind of see what happens there, but overall, an outstanding recruiting class. Definitely a class that they feel like they can compete for national championships with in the upcoming years. And I think you got to commend this Alabama coaching staff a lot for the job they've been able to do in terms of pulling kids in, even kids that have never even visited Alabama before. Either at all or as recruits. Devontae Smith has visited Alabama, but never as a recruit. J.C. Latham, Christian Leary, never visited Alabama before. So, you get those guys, in your recruiting class without ever visiting, you're doing something right. And I think this new strength and conditioning staff, I think they've been lights out as well. A lot of these recruits haven't been able to meet them yet, but in terms of FaceTime and talking to these guys over the phone and being very active on social media, I think that's been very beneficial as well. So got to give those guys a lot of props throughout this entire recruiting process so far. So we'll kind of see what happens the rest of the way and kind of see what happens. But I think Alabama, certainly fighting for that #1 overall spot. Currently at #1, but as we know, things can change pretty quickly. They can move down to #2, back to #1, and back and forth we go. So they can close with some of these top remaining targets down the home stretch. Some of these guys who are performing at a really high level. This season so far, got a chance to move up in the rankings. I certainly believe that Alabama can finish as the top recruiting class in the country yet again. So that's all for this evening. Hope you guys enjoy. And once again, you can purchase my book, The Road to Bama, on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, Triumph Books. I got a copy right here. The Road to Bama, incredible twists and improbable turns along the Crimson Tide recruiting trail. So pick up a copy today and roll tide.